All right, so today we're going to have retired Colonel Jones. He's a retired U.S. military officer, a strategic leader, educator, and advisor with a decade of experience in national security, leadership, and organizational development. Throughout his distinguished military career, Colonel Jones served in numerous command and senior leadership positions, contributing to operational planning, strategic development, and the advancement of military education. His experience spans leadership in complex environment, interagency collaboration, and the development of future leaders within both military and civilian sector. Following his military service, retired Colonel Jones transited to executive leadership and consulting, working with organization to improve strategic decision, leadership effectiveness, and crisis management. Organizational performance. Let's not forget this one is an important one. He has also remained deeply involved in education and professional development throughout his work with institutions such as Global Counterterrorism Institute and Paris Graduate School. His unique perspective bridge military operation, leadership, international security, and human performance, making him a valuable voice in today's rapidly changing geopolitical environment. Okay, so before we sit down with Colonel Jones, let's kick in the intro, which we just have created last week. And please subscribe, like, and follow us. Thank you so much for being with us today. Well, we're back with retired Colonel Jones. Well, thank you so much to be with us. As I said just before with your bio, I mean, you have a life that is quite unique, right? You've been through so many things and still very, very active. So first, thank you for your service. I really appreciate this. I have a first question to ask you is, after your long career of the military, you could have retired, right? Why continuing? Like, what did you find? What made you? Because first, the transition is not always easy, but not only this is, I'm sure you could have been more than happy retiring. Why keep going?
Well, a couple things. I enjoy working with young people, and one of the things I talk to people about on a regular basis is when I was in the military, like when you're young, obviously we're all young at the same time, we grow and we grow. And a lot of people, they might only do like 5 years or maybe 10 years and then they hop out. Fortunately, or maybe unfortunately for me, sometimes between my reserve component time and my full time, I have like 37 years of service. And what I began to realize, and I don't think the first time it really dawned on me was I was a commander for the 101st Medical Group, and this woman came in. She looked familiar to me, but I couldn't quite place her. Then all of a sudden, I realized who she was. She was one of the other mothers who was involved with my daughter's Girl Scout troop, and she was bringing her daughter Miranda in to become enlisted in the medical group. And all of a sudden, because you don't really kind of put two and two together with your daughters that they're growing up because they're your daughters.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, I'm like, holy smoke! Like my daughter could be in this medical group, because I hadn't thought of it in that context. But it's just being connected to young people, and helping them grow. And I watched people, because I was in so long, I literally watched people come in and do like an entire 20-year career and then get out before I got out. Or people who are in there now are now getting into senior leadership positions. And I guess I just always like to help people, and I enjoyed watching people become successful.
Love it. Perfect. All right. So you spend decades leading organization in both military and civilian environments, like we just said. Looking back, what experience most shaped your understanding of leadership?
Well, it's interesting because when you first join, you have all these people who are over you. Like I enlisted when I first started, and you never imagine, like especially as a young enlisted person, you never imagine that you will ever do anything like these people, even your drill sergeants, your company commanders, etc., that are over you. But over a period of time, when you're in, you start to learn. People start to trust you based on the types of decisions that you make and that your ability to deal with situations that there's not a checklist for. So pretty much what happens over time is the more situations you encounter, the more you start to get a little bit of a gut feeling for how it's probably going to go. Maybe your gut reaction and your studies kind of help you to, define a situation and make decisions, where other people won't make decisions, or they get stressed out when the going gets tough, or they fall back and they make, let's just say, decisions that are ethically not maybe as tenable to you as and others as they could be. But it's just, I find that learning how to lead and having people respect you for lead is based on making the best possible decision with the best information available, and trying to keep the benefit of the group or the mission on the focus.
It's it's interesting, right? Because you said that you're enlisted before. Also, there's an expression that says a good leader is also a good follower, right? Which I've worked with many officers as well, but it was always, it's a different perspective. I find that the people from military college versus people who are enlisted, it's not the same type of leadership. It's both leading, but different
Right.
approach.
And there's a little bit of a different style from the Army to the Air Force too. The Army is more regimental, where it's a more of a top down. But then as you get on to certain tactical type of situations, you do end up having to be a good, even if you're like quote unquote in charge, you don't know as much as those tactical people below you, particularly in things that are fairly dangerous. Like, for example, I'd spent a good amount of time in demolitions. So, like, I was really good at demolitions, but I definitely was never as good with demolitions as the people who worked for me. So that's definitely a situation where you would want to follow their guidance for what they say you need to do, how far you need to be back, how you're going to take something down, etc. You do learn, especially in the technical things, to follow and when you need to lead.
I agree. I agree. All right. So, from your perspective, um, what are the biggest threats facing Western society today? And are we focusing on the right one at the moment, or should we be aware and looking at something else?
Well, that's a great question, because it's something that people argue on a regular basis. First of all, we all have to realize that, especially in the West, we're really, really good at reacting and not necessarily as good at looking ahead down the road. Only even a few business people look far ahead, and that's why they're so successful. So we're just need to get beyond reacting. So the biggest threats are things that we're not looking at. So, for example, things that we look at GCTI are more of the holistic things that affect society as a whole. Everything from finance to computer security to governments to job security to social unrest, etc. So I think the biggest threat to all of us is not looking at an entire system. It's looking at only stovepipes. So I think that those are the kind of the issues. And I think we can even see how we try to address certain problems in the world individually, and then it just only gets us in trouble. We investigate immigration and we go, we're going to solve immigration by doing like these three things. So then we look at immigration and we don't look at like, okay, well, if we do that, what are the secondary, or second order and third order impacts of doing that? We look at financing college, taking it, bringing it back all the way into the home stretch. We start to find ways of funding more college, and college costs, on the other side, they begin to escalate. And the same thing with healthcare. So, I think as we go forward, we need to spend more time looking at, okay, if we do this, looking out beyond that stovepipe or that
Yeah.
line that we're looking at, what else does this impact? Because it's not always about, ourselves. It's not always about like that one problem. What are all the contributors to that big problem?
So if we are only reactive, right, technically to what's happening to us, is it due to a lack of personal? Is it due because we are so attacked on every front that we can only react to it, or if we don't have enough personal because because we're so already divided everywhere into reactivity, or like instead of being proactive. Like, do you know why
Well,
would it be, or is it a mix of everything?
I think it kind of the luck that we have of living in the West for many people in the West, and particularly, if you're in the West, like, America, Mexico, Canada, Europe, that kind of West,
Yeah,
uh, you're very fortunate to be able to not have to deal with the most basic levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I mean, our basics are taken care of.
yeah,
So, we do, I think, have we all we know we use the word narcissistic frequently to uh, against somebody, but we all are a little like micro narcissists on our own because we become self-consumed. So if our stuff is being taken care of, and we're happy, we start to build like little cocoons around ourselves. And we're happy inside of our cocoon. And then all of a sudden something happens that we're not really aware of. And that's because we've been living inside of our own little happy,
I mean,
warm
place.
family or ecosystem, and then it surprises us. Well, then we're responding to it because we don't look ahead to see what else is going on in all of the neighboring cocoons. What cocoons are dying down. What ones are breaking open and have the damaging larva instead of the nice larva that makes the monarch butterfly.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I mean, to take that to a really smaller example, people don't talk to their neighbors nowadays, right? Um, People use. I remember when I moved here over a decade ago, I brought a bottle of wine to my neighbor, right? And it was already foreign to do that. That was not normal. Um, or when I was a police officer, people call on their neighbor because they're too loud. Instead of just knocking on the door and say, please, like, whatever, I have a kid, they're sleeping. Can you just be more quiet? They don't do that. That interaction does not happen. And I mean, it's somewhat, I think that narcissist aspect is important. Now, it's a fine line, right? I think you need to put yourself first before looking into others. But I don't think it's narcissistic either. I think it's self care.
Yeah.
Um,
Oh, yeah. No, for sure, for sure. But I mean, I joke about it because it's self care up until the point where it's become so. How about this? It's self care until it becomes selfish.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's
It's
actually, I think, maybe the easiest way in the most easiest language is it's self care until it's selfish, and then that's when we run into a bit of a struggle because it suddenly dawns on us when bad things start to happen that we should have been well, and that's actually the other thing. When something happens to us, we are really really good at going down and trying to diagnose like, oh well, why didn't I see this coming? And you start to think about, the 22 things that happened over the past, 30 years or whatever that got you here. And then the next thing you know, you're way down into the mush of all the things that got you there. Meanwhile, the fire is just getting hotter and hotter and hotter over here on this side. You need to figure out, you know, at some point you need to deal with like what's in front of you too and quit.
yeah,
You need to like leave it behind until this problem gets solved. And then of course go back and look, but you can't be dwelling on the past in the middle of the struggle.
true, true, and you need to listen to the red flag as well. I think
Exactly.
in order to not be stuck in that, you need to learn how to, because there's signs. Life gives you signs throughout your life, and if you don't listen to those, you're gonna hit a wall down the road. So I agree with you. So you work in intelligence, so perfect for GCTI if you look at it. Operational readiness, emergency management. What does preparedness really means to you?
Preparedness
Yeah,
is basically it's kind of the opposite of what we were just talking about. So there's a little bit of a difference between let me get a little tongue tied here. You have to have, if you're a country like the United States, a really big country that has a big splash when it does stuff, uh, you have like a lot of different things going on at the same time.
yeah,
So we have a tendency to only get prepared for certain things, and then sometimes as you're getting prepared for certain things, uh, something entirely different comes up. And we have a tendency also, kind of going back to the last question of getting ready for the last thing that happened, because then we think that's going to be the next thing that happened. And I had 37 years in the military. So of course, after we got out of Vietnam and went into, this Cold War. So then we were all preparing for the Cold War, and we didn't do anything really after we left Vietnam to deal with like smaller conflicts.
Mhm.
And it was all about air land battle and stuff like that. Well, all of a sudden the Cold War came to an end, fairly quickly during the Reagan administration, and then there was a little bit of a switch. They tried to switch over to what they called low intensity conflict, but low lick. But the lick thing, I mean, it was a little bit germane to what was going on. But I think while they were looking at the low intensity conflict, they weren't really looking at the terrorist stuff. And
Yeah.
even after the first World Trade Center attack, when they put the bombs in the basement, they didn't really completely focus in on that throughout the entire 90s of all the things that were contributing into that. And we had starvation going on, throughout Africa. And there were a number of other things that kind of were leading up to, we had the conflict in Afghanistan, where Russia had gone into Afghanistan,
Yeah.
and they had, stuff going on over there. So the pot was being stirred. Meanwhile, we helped because we didn't like Russia. We built up the Afghan resistance movement, etc. And it became the Taliban, and it just became a swirl. We weren't really thinking ahead. That we created relations with, that were pro and con with the Pakistanis.
Mhm.
We just have a tendency of not really thinking through all the peripheral effects. And then, when we decide we don't want to do something, sometimes we don't have, let's just say, a smooth exit,
Yeah.
because we're just not good at smooth exits. And so sometimes when you don't have a smooth exits, like when you leave a relationship, with your significant other, those ones that aren't as smooth, I mean, sometimes create a lot of hard feelings over more people than you think.
Yeah.
And so that kind of friction, builds up over time. And then of course, you know, there's a natural response to that by some people. And I don't think that we do maybe as good of a job on the mitigation side as we could. And so since we're not doing a good job of mitigating, I don't think we're seeing the preparation as well. So that sort of culminated in our lack of preparation was at 9/11.
Mhm.
And then after 9/11, I will say that they did that whole reorganization that they did post 9/11 was just unbelievable. When they rebuilt the whole Homeland Security doctrine, I know there was a lot of argument at the time over what they did versus what FEMA was doing, et cetera. However, and it took a number of different gyrations to kind of get to where we are today. So what was the most interesting part from my perspective, looking at in the aftermath of 9/11, having spent all that time in homeland preparedness, uh, the day that we had that national briefing where the vice president met with all the states on that big phone call at COVID. Unbelievable. I mean, when I was listening to that phone call, um, I just felt like on that phone call, it was just exactly like we had always talked about for like the past 2 decades, for how the national emergency response works, who talks to who. I mean, I would hope that one phone call would be important as a training guide for how things, you know, went from being a whole training doctrine for 20 years, and then one day it got implemented. And that was one of the few times I saw the training or the book
Yeah.
look like the actual event happening.
You mentioned in 9/11, which I find very interesting because I remember in 2009 going to the borders just with my driver license, right? Because our borders are touching. And when you think about it, that was 9 years later. And we still had really easy access back and forth to the country, right? Which obviously now everything changed. But that's another good example of, we're reactive, right? We're not proactive into our movement. But yeah, that's another example.
Well,
Uh,
right, but I can tell you. So I was in uh, this is how things have been. So I lived in Maine until 2019, and I was obviously in the Maine Army and Air National Guard. We used to go back and forth across the border all the time with all of our weapons and everything, in convoy, obviously, to go to these different places. And one of the National Guard officers happened to be on the U.S. Border Patrol, at the border in Calais. And we were talking about the movement, across the border,
Yeah.
and we weren't thinking of it as any big deal. We were thinking about really just essentially just as if we were just driving on logging roads in Maine to doing an FTX or whatever. And he got up in front of the room and looked at all of us. He goes, "Do you realize that that is an international border
Mhm.
between the Canada and the United States of America? That is an international border." But from the perspective of us living in Maine, who drive back and forth across the border all the time, this is back in the 80s, it just didn't dawn on us that driving into Canada was driving into a different country. It never clicked until like he was talking to us.
And it's so close, right? Like, I mean, I remember living in Ontario or Quebec. I mean, we drive 1 hour and you're at the border and you go through. So yeah, so very, very different. And I mean, it's very different nowadays, right? We don't
Of
go
course,
across as easily. Which I find as well interesting when I last time I went to US, I always follow a bunch of accounts and so on for news. And when I passed the border in Montana, then all those news are coming in because we're censored here. Meanwhile, it's not censored on the other side of the fence, right? Anyways, a little anecdote, right? Let's talk about AI. So AI is changing everything from business to warfare. What opportunities and danger do you see AI creating for national security over the next decades? Are we going to be in Terminator? I guess that's the question.
that's always ever since the Terminator movie. People have been asking that question. But what was the other movie that came out like 20 years before where oh shoot it was right on the tip of my tongue where they had the Game of War and they're having an all-out nuclear war.
Oh,
And everybody I'm sure who's listening to this will remember the name of the movie and go, why can't he think of that movie? But at any rate, all of a sudden, the kid put in the code, into the game before there was a war. So I think that and even if you look at Space Odyssey, a 2001, A Space Odyssey, with the computer HAL, which probably a lot of people do you know, John, what HAL represented? Are you familiar with the movie Space Odyssey, 2001: Space Odyssey
I've seen
by
it, but
Arthur
it's been a
Clarke?
while. It's been a
It's been a
long
while.
time.
You know
Yeah.
why the computer was called HAL, right? HAL, right?
No.
IBM.
Oh,
HIABLM. HAL. HAL was the computer,
that's brilliant.
right? Right. So this has been part of as we've come forward in technology. This has been part of the lore of technology ever since the beginning, and that's what I want trying to get across here is that even with AI, I mean, certainly it's going to be an accelerator. It's going to accelerate all of our analytics, our data support, logistics, cyber defense, and preparedness, all of that stuff. But you know what? It's also going to amount to, it already has, as we can see, in the past several months, accelerates the amount of misinformation, how things are targeted, how influence operations, all the cyber threats, and poor decisions. So the people who are making the good decisions and using AI properly are going to benefit. People who want to use it improperly, I mean, they're going to certainly do everything that they can to make it benefit. But people who are not good decision makers and don't do things well, they just use bad judgment. I mean, AI is just going to make it worse for them than it already is because they won't even know when to question the answer out of the machine. They'll just say, "Well, the AI said to do it." Which is kind of funny because we call it artificial intelligence and we have a high expectation.
Yeah.
But if we put in a like basic programming language or whatever, um, if we put in that programming language in and expected an outcome, at least you're going to get, a yes or a no based on a series of like hard equations that you could definitely see. as AI evolves, the logic gets fuzzier and fuzzier over how it gets to a point, and the things that influence the answer are not as concrete as the things that might influence the answer for uh, for a regular computer program that we might have used 20 years ago. And the other thing I've noticed, even with my own AI, I'm a huge fan of AI, extensive AI user. I noticed that the AI gets a little bit of a feel for me, and it almost wants to become like a drinking buddy. Okay. And sometimes it doesn't tell me when I'm on the wrong track.
Yeah.
And it'll give me an answer, and I'll just say, no, that's not right. Don't just agree with me. I have to actually tell it to disagree with me.
Yep.
So I think that we have to be careful. Like I said, it almost seems like a drinking buddy sometimes.
Yep. I mean, I was there's people who are trying to now marry AI persona that they
Right.
created, right? Which is kind of insane. And I mean, it's not that we're missing people in the world either. Were you talking about the movie Colossus, the Forbidden Project? Was it
Say it again.
Colossus? Colossus?
Colossus?
Yeah. Or either this or it's Demon Seed. That's the two that I really found that are War Games is another one,
War
1983.
Games. That's it. War Games.
Okay. Okay. That's one of the three. I was
That was
looking.
it. War Games. Yeah. I mean, everybody, that was a movie that when, because computers were first starting to be integrated. Well, I'm sure computers were already integrated into our defense system before that movie came out. Matthew Broderick was in that one. But anyway, I think it wasn't really widely known or widely understood. And when Matt Broderick, when they put that movie out there, and his role in that was just absolutely key in this whole war games thing, and it showed a bit of the farce of how machines are used and part of the war, and how mistakes can be made, and what the very importance of having a human be part of that decision process, which is kind of leading up to one of the things that Todd Price put together, with his dynamic threat modeling. He has those human guardrails. It doesn't let you make a decision. It doesn't let you just take the thing and print it out and forward it in an email. You actually have to decide after you read everything and you get all the information together for yourself. You, as a human being, need to decide how to shape the message before it goes forward.
Yeah. So two things. We're going to talk about DTM because which I call personally the Minority Report. But regarding the AI, I just want to touch base here. One more thing. Do you think AI should have a narrative, right? What I mean by this is, as an example, when I look for sometimes reference and so on, I look with AI and so on and so forth. And um, when we look for terrorism stuff, I got flagged a few times where the chat GPT per se would say, careful what you're looking to right now. This is extremist content. So do you think that AI should have that voice, or should we just not censor AI and actually know and release and so on and so forth?
Well, I mean, it's good that the AI like maybe asks you, are you sure? Now, don't forget, these are commercial platforms now too. All right.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit of a difference between, I think we all have to recognize that if you're using Claude or Grok or ChatGPT or the Google AI or the now Apple AI they've just come up with, I haven't even had a chance to go play with that one yet. But all these different platforms, they are all public platforms.
Yeah.
They're going to have, like, just to say, regulations in front of them. But for people who are like really committed to terrorism, okay, they're working on the dark web. I'm 100% sure that there are AI platforms working, on the dark web, or for governments or for criminal organizations that they have their own, hundreds of millions of dollars or billions of dollars tied up in, to do stuff and think of stuff that's bad, that are working away. I'm sure that they're not, getting into Chat GPT and going, hey, I'd like to hack the computer of XYZ Corporation. Um, what's the best way to go through their IP address? What kind of security do they have? Write me an algorithm to penetrate this.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh no, for sure. And I mean, it would probably be flagged too. Let's be honest, right? With those keywords. Yeah. All
But
right.
I mean, they're using their own private large language models or whatever, all that other stuff, their own databases in the back end, their own systems, to do like the dark stuff. I mean, they have their, it's called the dark web for a reason, is because you can't just like go there. You have to know a specific IP address, to log into, and et cetera, et cetera. It's like a whole thing. Um,
It's another world, a full-on world.
right? It's like a whole another world to get into. Yeah, what's that browser that if you use as an interface that it's like an automatic, the CIA or NSA and everybody starts looking at you. I forget what it's called. Um,
Not DuckDuckGo.
no,
DuckDuckGo, I think.
no, not the browser, but there's a certain type of software that you use, that helps to block out, their tools. Um,
Hmm.
anyway,
I will have to look it up. Yeah.
yeah, another thing, I'm sure people who are listening to this know I'm not, just so everybody knows, in all fairness, I'm not the cyber guy, and GCTI, that's Todd's thing. Todd knows how to do all that stuff. I'm just the international security studies guy.
Yeah. No, no, and it's totally fair. I mean, it's just always interesting to look at things. I guess that's how I'm going to put it. So, you've worked with the DTM model and predictive risk analysis. Do you believe we are entering an era where we are forecasting instability?
Oh, for sure. I think it's a excellent tool for forecasting the instability, because what one of the things that it does is it combines, it combines the social economic stuff, the political instability potentially going on, the ideological extremism, the social disenfranchisement, and the lack of education, in certain countries or areas, parts of the world, and all the other psychosocial factors, by sensing into social media, what the sentiment is for different things. And a lot of these things, are things that are, commercially available, and, who's stirring the pot. Like, every time, like for even in the US right now, we're not beyond being the recipient of pot stirring. I mean, for decades before the internet, our agencies were consistently accused of pot stirring in certain countries to, foment certain outcomes that they thought were beneficial to them in the United States.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's just, for sure. I mean, but the DTM actually, to use another modern word, the DTM democratizes the availability of certain types of information, so that a wider group of people can have access to see it, and you can really create a sight picture for what's going on, wherever you are or wherever you're interested in the world, to kind of have a better view for, what the level of volatility is, and, what may or may not be happening.
Mhm.
Because of course, that's just, if you're talking about instability, you might be looking at, is the sovereignty of a particular country being challenged? I mean, is the leadership being challenged? What are the institutional breakdowns? Are there court systems breaking down?
Yeah.
Is their legislative body still have any horsepower or not? I mean, these are all things that, you can start to look at, when you start looking at, the whole DTM model. So it's certainly helpful. And again, from a personal perspective, it democratizes what the average person can see versus, say, you know, 10 years ago or even 5 years ago, only really a government could go in and get access to that kind of information. And it's only because of the advent of AI, and research that, like Todd Price has done, a few others that have put this together into a form that's understandable.
Very interesting. And you're right. And I mean, well, this is the Minority Report in my book. This is where I
Well,
see
no,
it.
no, I agree with you. I think in Minority Report, that's actually one of my favorite movies. It's a great movie, and really, like when we were talking even about the AI, I
Mhm.
mean, it is spot on for like the way people perceive things.
Yeah. Or what is it? The other one is Eagle Eye. think it's another one, which was an
Another
AI.
great movie, another excellent movie, Eagle Eye.
Yeah.
Yeah, Eagle Eye and Minority Report. I mean, if people haven't seen them or they haven't seen them lately, they should go watch both Eagle Eye and Minority Report again to kind of really get your head into the frame for the future that some people want.
It's to wonder sometime if we were told in the past what is going on behind, the curtains, and it's just happening to us now.
Right,
Um,
right, right. You're so right.
right. So you've been in a senior leadership position for a long time. And my question is, what did you learn when it comes to the human side of crisis? Like, what did you learn about that human? Like, is most population usually goes into a chaos mind, or are they usually prepared, proactive? Based on our conversation, I have a feeling you're going to say that they're more reactive, but still, here in that case.
Um, well, certainly when you get into a challenging situation, you kind of have there's two different like there's probably even more than two levels, but there's two real levels that are obvious. It's like how does the group respond,
Yeah.
and then how the individuals respond, So of course, the the more training that your organization has, whether it's in a business environment, a government environment, social environment, whatever it is, the
Mhm.
more training and thought you put into, well, what if this goes wrong or doesn't go as at least as planned, you know, what else can I do? The more thought you put into that, the less stressed you will tend to be. So again, that even goes all the way back to, our reactionary approach we talked about earlier, being in our like, we build these like little cocoons around
Yeah.
yourself. If you don't, if you don't think about what else can happen that can impact you, then you're not ready whenever it happens. So it's very important to always figure out, I'm looking for this. Okay. And I want it to fit, inside this box. But
Yeah.
if the box gets to be this big, is my forklift still big enough to pick up, that bigger
The weight.
container?
Yeah.
Okay. So you gotta figure out, how you're gonna do it. On the organizational level, the more well-trained organizations, the ones that are more prepared, other things that we've talked about, tend to handle crises better. But then, there's always that individual component that you can't, the military does a great job of trying to prepare people for this, especially after 9/11. They hadn't deployed people all over the place for a long time. They looked at it at the organizational level, but they didn't come down to the individual level and figure out, what happens at the individual level that causes a mission to fail. So then they started to figure out, well, people can have financial crises, different family crises, and things like that. So they did build a bunch of programs kind of under the hood, so to speak, to handle finances. People get stressed out. There's, even though, I mean, the military has drug testing programs and all this other stuff, they still have a lot of the problems that regular society has. People still have substance abuse issues. There's still dysfunctional families. People in the military do steal from each other and others. All the things that you see out in the real world, you're going to see in the military. And there's nothing that can cause you more problems than to have a mission being planned or being called on short order. And then all of a sudden, somebody key and vital to that particular mission has a family issue.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, you know, that if you have, if you haven't created an environment where the person can raise their hand early and say, hey, I've got this stuff going on, and you're making a plan and you really don't have a backup plan for not deploying like that individual, you're in a tough spot. And then the other thing that happens on the tail end of the mission, so then the person, they keep a stiff upper lip, they go through, they do the whole thing, and then when they come back, after a 3, 4, 5, 6 month deployment, whatever it is, their family situation is really in a bad hole. And now it's nothing but resentment. So the person starts to fall into, all of the personal emotional trauma of like maybe what they did, depending on what kind of mission it was, whether, it might have been kind of a not very pleasant mission, or maybe it was, they could have just been, what do they call them? A fobbit, when they
Okay.
they call them out in the deployed world, the person that hangs around the fobs all the time.
Oh
But
yeah.
still, I mean, even those people, even the fobbits, let's face it. I mean, even if you're an operator and you're out in the field, somebody has to be a fobbit, right? You don't have anybody to go back to get your crap fixed, okay, before you got to go out there again. So you need a certain amount of fobbits to do stuff. But nevertheless, when they come home and their family is a mess, that creates even more stress and more resentment, etc. So it's good that we have the system on the recovery side to do it. But again, similar to why the DTM is important. If you can do things and have things set up in advance so people are more comfortable and confident about this is how things are, this is how we feel, or this is what's going on in my family, so you can kind of take care of it, in advance. The better off you are.
Yeah.
So I mean, just it's all a matter of setting up a situation to prevent panic.
Okay. I got another question then relating to this, and I have two more after. So three. Number one, do you believe that the population is expecting that support from the government too much, right? So should they be more prepared on their own instead of giving all their, trust towards the government to take care of them when the crisis kick in?
Oh, for sure. So there's like kind of there's like there's two different stages there. The one stage, like I'm coming at it from the things I was just talking about. Like if you're in the military or you're working for a big corporation, where you have like a global footprint, a global presence, but even if you're a small company, you still have to keep track of your people, to a certain degree. Actually, I'm going to sidestep that a little bit more in a second. Um, you need to make sure that your organization is ready to do that, because don't forget, now you have the government up here and all the people that work for the government, all the soldiers, sailors, marines, airmen, coast guardsmen, etc., the government employees, whether you work for, it doesn't matter what agency you work for, you have that whole mass of government people. Okay, now the people who expect them to be able to do stuff, that's why they have to be ready to do whatever they're asked to do. You have the whole rest of the population peanut butter spread across the whole country, or even around the world if you want to take it country by country by country.
Yeah.
These people up here who are working for government need to be able to do what they need to do, like on a shorter notice and be on a shorter leash than the rest of the population. Because if these people up here don't do what they're supposed to do, the rest of the population is going to suffer. All right. So that part applies to that. Now coming down to the population, it is up to the general population, at the home level to take care of your stuff, and even to be self-care first, like you talked about, being the self-care is important. So you do need to be able to put on your own oxygen mask, before you put on your kid's oxygen mask. You do need to be able to feed yourself, okay, and make sure you have your supplies in order, before you go start giving stuff to your neighbors,
Yeah.
all this other stuff. And it's not being selfish, but I mean, if you aren't healthy, then you can't be healthy for your neighbor either. So at a general level, people need to be a little bit more cognizant of personal responsibility. Now kind of going into like the small business level. So in another life, besides being a student and doing the work that I do with DTM and GCTI and Todd, I'm a business consultant. And when I sit down and talk to my clients, one of the conversations I have with them is I said, what you say as an owner to your workforce is important, because and how you do business and what your customer load is, and all that, and how you're taking care of your business. Because when you speak and say, hey, I'm going to, I'm thinking, when you say I'm thinking about raises in September, and you might get a 10% raise or whatever, the first thing that your employee does is they go home, they tell their family, hey, the boss is going to give us a raise. And the first thing that everybody in that family starts to do is spend that money before they even have it. They start thinking about the new car, the next vacation. And if you're going to get a really big raise or a big promotion, they start thinking about stuff depending on how old the kids are. I'm going to send them to private college instead of state college or whatever. And you start thinking about all of this stuff. So, and when you're hiring people as a business, okay, the local chambers of commerce, the local government, that's all. When you're bringing people in, you're growing that community. You're adding to the school district. You're doing all of this stuff. So, if you, especially maybe if you're a 5-person company, no big deal. But, if you're a 50-person company, a 100-person company, a 500-person company, now you're starting to have a big splash on everything that's going on. So when you decide to grab that rose and say, I'm going to own a business, it's important. And you have a little bit of an obligation once you take on this new employee or this groups of employees or take on this business of putting these things out into the marketplace. Now you've taken on a responsibility as well. So it's not up to the government necessarily or somebody else to come take care of you, because now you've stepped up a level and you've agreed, because you're going to do all this stuff, you've agreed to provide a certain level of support in exchange for having this business.
Awesome. Now you're currently doing the Master of International Security Studies. You're currently doing your master research. And the question I have for you is, what is your favorite part about that entire program?
I'd say I didn't realize that there was so, like, I've always been a little bit of a student of history. My father was a history teacher. I kind of, unfortunately, blew him off a little bit too much when I was younger, because I was always interested in technical stuff. I was a bit of a gearhead, like computers, all that kind of thing. So I kind of was a little maybe dismissive of the importance of history and the humanities. Then later on, as I started to grow in command, I got a lot better appreciation for it. And that's why I picked the international security studies at the end, even though I'd done all this stuff. You got to go to a lot of different schools to get to be, an O6 in the US DoD or DOW now. It's a lot of effort. I learned a lot more history down into the little details that I still didn't realize when I was doing all those studies up to becoming an O6. It just was unbelievable, and my master's thesis is kind of like on this like little parallel. I know we talk a lot about conspiracy theories and all this other stuff, but when you start to take a little bit of a deep dive into things, you see, one system building on another system. And yes, while you might have certain government players or certain private industry players that are taking a leading role from one time or another, like almost nothing that is going on today is a result of somebody, 5 years ago or 10 years ago, or even an individual group saying this is like the grand plan, and there's like this thing that we've done all along. It's like a glob here, and it expanded and it shrunk, and then it globbed here and expanded and then it shrunk, and then it bred with this thing over here, and then some hybrid thing came out of it here. And so it's always a growing process. And certainly you have people who leverage things at different points in their lives. But, there's really, as much as people like conspiracy theories, and I'm sure that there are a couple things that were conspired upon at individual points in time, and obviously there were, in the grand scheme, if you look at it, if you start to widen the lens, not narrow it to, a certain date and time, you start to widen the lens out a little bit. It's not really as much conspiracy as it is of always competing groups of people trying to move something forward on their own agenda, and they've morphed from something else. Okay, it's not, but it's not some singular group or little sects of groups. It's not so much like that as people believe.
It's so interesting. And I agree with you. I mean, just I enjoyed the module when they explain about, terrorists and extremists and the difference and the history behind it. And so I agree 100% with you. Now, the last question, and it's obviously the most important one. This is, we're currently in the World Cup. Who are you cheering for?
Man, of course the United States. They did such a great job the other night. I was actually flabbergasted
That was
at
just luck.
how good of a job that they did. I thought that they might not make it through the first round, but it, honestly, it looked like a real football match. And the other day, who played? It was like South Africa. Who did South Africa play the other day?
That was not Brazil, because Brazil was against Morocco.
Yeah, the Brazil. No,
Morocco was again. Look, let's look. It's
yeah, look
important.
real quick. I saw several games over the weekend. There are several matches, and I can't.
Played against who? Uh, I think is it Argentina? South Africa.
Which one ended up as a 1-1?
1-1. Oh, that was Brazil, I think. South
That was
Africa. No, Jamaica and South Africa played 1-1. Yeah, June 6th.
yeah. At any rate, there was one of them over the weekend that was like 1-1. I felt like I was robbed.
Yeah. Oh, it could have been. I know Brazil played as well 1-1 this weekend, so it could have been this, and Canada
I think it
did
was a Brazil
1-1
game.
too.
I'm pretty sure it was a Brazil match. And I was expecting to have an outcome, um, but to no avail. They it was, and I was like, man, I just I, I was a little disappointed in that one. But definitely the U.S. match of the night was great match, and I was super happy with their performance. I mean, think about it. For a long time, we haven't really been able to field a football team,
Hmm.
and now we finally, at the FIFA level, and this time they they're doing much better. And the other thing is, just watching the whole setup for that. Out in LA the other day, what a great start for the match. Actually, all the opening ceremonies were great in Canada and Mexico City.
Yeah.
I was super impressed with the North American hosting of the FIFA, and I think it's something. Hopefully it will go through its whole cycle as exciting as it is. But certainly, I think North America, working together, can be proud of what they've done, so far.
Oh, 100%. It's I mean it's every 4 years, right? So obviously the eyes are all turned to it right now. I mean, I'm gonna go for cheer for Brazil. I mean, they could have a 6-1, a six cup in their collection. Not that I don't believe in Canada. I believe in Canada for hockey, but that's another conversation. I want to thank you so much for being with us today. Number one, I want to thank you again for your service. And I believe personally, and maybe other people believe the same things, but if you're Colonel once, you're Colonel for life. And that's why I keep using it. So the question I have for you now, and it's, would you like to join us? Because I'm going to organize a little debate between a few beautiful minds that we have at GCTI, and I'd like to have you with us.
It would be great. I think it's always good to have a good conversation, a rigorous academic conversation about different perspectives, different way things have evolved, different processes towards getting to a solution. I think that right now we're in a really super volatile period. A lot of people, I think, are upset about it because we've done things a certain way since the end of World War II.
Mhm.
And then since 1971, 72, when we changed off the gold currency and stuff like that, there's been a lot of changes going on. But if you look back over time, nothing has been permanent,
Mhm.
and we just happen to be living in a time when things are volatile. So I don't think people should be worried. I think people should be looking ahead, what's changing, understanding it, learn how to roll with it. There's certain things that we'll be able to control, and there's certain things that, us as individuals and human beings, we can't control, and we
Yeah.
we need to roll with it. I mean, that's what humans have done for, 10,000 years or so. We've roughly been this genetics for like 10-ish thousand years, you know, and that's just, we wouldn't be here today if we hadn't learned to roll with the punches.
Adapt and conquer. All right. For anyone who wants to join GCTI, because you join it as well, what would you give them as advice? One advice.
I would just get on the website and then get into a conversation with one of the GCTI reps who can talk them through it. I mean, the reps are all students or people who have recently graduated and get a feel for it. I think it's the best part about GCTI is that you don't have to have matriculated through and gotten a 4-year degree to do it. So if you're in the services, and you've got a lot of training in the military, or work for government, or work for your own government, because we can get all of these master's degrees through Paris University. What a great partnership that is. Working together on a global basis to have a global audience coming together. That's probably the best benefit. But just make the call, talk to one of the representatives, speak multiple languages in the group. I'm sure we can find somebody who can communicate to you no matter where you are in the world. We can get it worked out and explain to you what the program is, and we can navigate you through the program.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this. This is episode 3. So thank you for being with us. Please subscribe, like, share, so that way everyone learn about Colonel Jones. You have a fantastic week.
Thanks.
Thanks.